Hey everybody, it's Bethany Stahl. I am an author and illustrator, and for every book, I really love creating a free animated audiobook, and I do that with a few different Adobe programs. I illustrate in Adobe Photoshop, I animate in Adobe After Effects, and then I tie it all together in Adobe Premiere. So right now, you're watching the entire creation of my animated audiobook. It took about 5 hours, and after I show you this in really fast time, I'm going to pick out a scene and we're going to walk through really slowly of everything I did. Basically, the steps are, first step, I consolidate my layers in Adobe Photoshop. So using Control E, I just form all the different assets in the illustration together, such as the sky, the characters, the trees, the mountains. Any elements are all on their own layer, and those layers are singular and all merged together, which is actually what I'm doing here. After that's done, I put them in alphabetical order, so I'll label the topmost layer A, and then go down from there. That way when I import it to Adobe After Effects, it's in order. Once I get it in After Effects, I will size it down using Control Shift. That way it keeps its proportions. And then at that point, I'll start adding movement. So a few of the shortcuts for opacity is T. To change the position of something is P, to change the rotation of something is R, to change the size of something is S, and you get kind of the idea of it. I also really love using the pin tool. That sort of makes little pinpoints on your characters, and that's how I move things like their heads, their arms, and all of those fun sorts of things. It doesn't take much to make a image sort of come to life, especially when you're pairing it with a voice actor, or if you do voice act yourself with a recording in Adobe Audition. So just a little bit of movement can go a long way, especially for kids. They'll get captured into your illustrations. So another thing I did want to say, I do like to tie it all up in Adobe Premiere. What I use Premiere for is after I create all the movement in After Effects and I create my images in Photoshop, I'll put it in Premiere, and that's where I will grab some music and overlay the music, and then I'll take my initial voice recording that I do in Adobe Audition, and I'll put that in there and sort of do one last sound balance, and I will fix any color toning problems that I may lose from Photoshop to After Effects, because sometimes the color correction layers don't translate perfectly. So I really love changing the levels and putting on different filters in terms of vibrancy and saturation after I'm done illustrating, and I'll lose that in After Effects for a bit, but again, I can put it right back with Adobe Premiere. So a really quick note, if you guys are looking into this, check out my Patreon page. I have a Adobe Audition file for leveling your voice on there. That way when you record, it's good to go for ACX, which is audible, and it also makes everything sound really good. I'm also going to give you guys a shortcut list of everything I just mentioned. That way you don't have to write it down or remember it. You'll be able to refer to it right away when you are working, which really, really helped me out when I first started learning. Okay, so now if you guys are still in here and I haven't blown your brains up with how many times I have said Adobe, we are going to go over one scene and exactly what I'm doing in that scene to create the movement. So here we go. Okay, so I've just imported my merged layers, and what I'm doing now is just trimming them down to the size of my voice acting clip that I'm listening to. So I just press Alt in a bracket to cut it on the left, and I do Alt in the close bracket to close it on the right. I like doing this just because the computer doesn't have to think as hard, and I can visually see where my clip starts and ends. Now I just shift clicked all the layers, and then I started to move the layers in and held shift as I did so, that way they would keep their proportions. So for the sky, I always like having it move, and since this one has a really cool bright sun, I want the sun to sort of rise. So I clicked on P to bring up my position keyframe while I'm highlighted on my sky layer, and I'm going to click on that little clock to make a keyframe. A keyframe is that little blue diamond, and basically what that does is tells the program to remember exactly where the position is at that time. So I want my starting position to show the sun down low and my ending position to show it up high. So I will want those keyframes, which are the diamonds, at the start and end of my clip. Okay, so I'm moving to the very end of my scene, and I'm moving the sun down, and that made a keyframe. I got rid of the first one, and I'm just going to drag that to the front because I want this position to be first. So now I moved my blue line marker to the end, and I'm dragging the sky all the way up to the top. That way the sun looks like it's rising. Now, if you don't want your layers to move as you're moving them, always hold down the shift key, and that will keep them in straight lines. Okay, so now you can see it looks like the sun is rising over this clip. So that layer is done. Now I have all these mountains, and I think it would be really cool to have some movement in the mountains of them rising and falling, and sort of having just a slight little bit of movement to create the background just a little bit more interesting. I also have my tree, which I can move in and out, and you can see where it clips off, and that's the edge of my illustration. So I don't ever want the lines to be shown. So I'm going to move the tree, so I put it in at the position I want, clicked on P, clicked on the keyframe button, and now I'm going to the end of the clip and moving the tree where I'd like it to end. That way, as the sky is rising, the tree is also rising at its own speed, at its own time. So I have these lanterns in the glow, and right now I'm just trying to figure out which glow goes where. It looked like one of my glows somehow got off a little bit and when I imported it, so I just adjusted it. But all the glows I want to change opacity together. So I highlighted all of them by control clicking them, and I press T, which is for opacity. So I remember that as T for transparency is for opacity. All the other ones make sense besides that one. You would think it would be O, but it's not. So I go ahead and click on T, click on the keyframe, and I am slowly making random points and changing the opacity levels. So you can change the opacity by either changing it numerically like you see me doing, or you can actually click on the percentage and drag to the left or right to change that opacity. So as you can see, the lanterns now have this very soft glow where they slowly get darker and brighter and darker and brighter, and I don't keep any rhythm or anything strict to that glow because the more random it is, the more organic it looks. So right now I'm parenting the glow to the front mountain. So a parent is when I drag that little squiggly line to the layer I want it to attach to. So basically what that means, whenever I move the very front mountain, this dark mountain, the lanterns, the glow, and the boy will all move with it. That way, I won't move the mountain and the lanterns go off the mountain, or I move the boy and the boy goes off the mountain. When I move the front mountain, everything else that is positioned on it will go with it. This will save you a lot of time and energy, and this way I only have to change the position of the front mountain to affect a bunch of different layers. But I can still affect those layers just like the glow has their own thing going on, but it's still attached to the front mountain. Parenting, I highly recommend it if you have a bunch of different elements like this. Just makes things easier. So here again, I pressed P, hit the little keyframe, and changed the position of the mountain for the boy to rise up over the course of this scene. So now I pressed S for scale, and I am changing the size of the mountains in the back. That way they have a little bit of movement. And I did these both a little bit different for each mountain. That way they're not together, and it creates a bit of additional movement in the animation. So again, another mountain, I'm creating the keyframes and changing the scale and size of that just a little bit by using the shortcut S. And you can see for that one, I dragged on the percentage from left to right versus changing it numerically. So whichever way you prefer, I do it differently depending on what I'm working on. Okay, so now I want my child. So my little boy or little girl, or any child, just it's a non-binary character. And this is the pin tool. So these pins are basically like if you're pinning a sheet of paper down and then moving it. So as you've seen, I moved the head and it tried to move other things, but now I'm moving the hand and it's stopping with the pin at the shoulder of my child. So you'll have to make pins even in areas that you don't want to move to hold your character down. And the best way I can explain it is think of you putting thumbtacks in a sheet of paper, and you want to only move the little part you're moving. So I, just like that, see how the legs, you can sort of move it, but it moves the rest of the body. I am just going to have the child's legs shift open a little bit to more get a power stance and their arms to open up. Just so they kind of start closed off and then they're like fully empowered by the end. So let's see how this looks. So there, just a little bit of movement. The sky looks great. The lanterns are flickering and the mountains are moving. I think we're good to go. So let me show you the final clip of this. What I do to polish up all my animations is I throw it into Adobe Premiere and then I add on my recorded sound of the reading of the book from Audition, and then I grab copyright-free music, or I work with an artist to do music and I balance that together. I fix the color just a little bit in Premiere, and then I'm good to go, and that will be another tutorial in the future. Here's the finished product.
In the night, thankful for this dream tonight. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and share with your friends. See you next time.